three things you must combine to be a filmmaker. You got to combine art, parking, and lunch. Those three things, you could make a hit movie.
No movie is easy to make. It takes a long time and a lot of stuff. Your job is to compromise every day of your life. They say, oh, it's a powerful position. It's the least powerful of all. It's just you have to concentrate for the longest.
Each time I start a film, while I'm doing it, while I'm editing it, by the time it's finished, I think this is the greatest thing since Hash. I mean, everybody's going to love this film. This is going to be a smashing success. This is going to win every Academy Award, everything. And, you know, they don't. But I've never gone into making a film, made a film, finished a film that I didn't think was going to just be knockout successful.
I love directing films. I love the challenge of it. I find that every day that I'm directing, I'm trying to synthesize all of the arts, you know, writing, composition, photography, performance, music, painting. I mean, everything, editing, is all contained in the art of filmmaking.
You develop a screenplay and you prepare a movie, the pre-production. And then one day you start to shoot the film. And then one day it's all over and your baby's born. It comes out and you look at it and now it's no longer yours. And that year of your life hopefully has been well spent and it's been productive and fulfilling. In its simplest form, that's what picture making is.
It's such an organic process that requires so many people to do all the right things at all the right times with passion and consistency, and it's a very difficult, unquantifiable thing, filmmaking.
My brother says directing plays is what you should do, because that's the only time when the director gets to go home and the actors have to stay.
I was in Texas promoting Munchausen. I was on a radio talk show, and some guy called in and he said he saw Baron Munchausen and he giggled in awe. And that's what I want on my tombstone, Terry Gilliam, R.I.P. He giggled in awe. I hope the films actually continue, no matter how old they become, to surprise people and make them look at the world through different eyes. I think that's all I care about.
That I wasn't predictable, and that I had a sense of humor, and I wasn't afraid to look in the dark places, and showed in some ways in and out of them, rather than going around them and pretending they weren't there.
You know, the best gratification you get is when somebody on the street comes up to you and says something, and you know it coming from their heart. You know, it's not coming from a, gee, I want to be in show business. It's coming from their heart, and you know when those feelings are, and it's beautiful, and it makes it all worthwhile, you know, and it makes you realize you're connecting. Even if you connect with a few people, it's wonderful.
I mean, ultimately, filmmakers are remembered for their films, most correctly. You know, the private stuff is ultimately irrelevant. It's what made it up on the screen, you know. So I never want to put anything in a film that I'm going to have to feel a little cringe about later. And so far I haven't. So far I feel pretty good about the stuff that's made it up on the screen. Maybe not some of the stuff that's on the editing room floor, but the stuff that made it into the final cut.
If there's a couple of those films that are around that people are still, you know, by the time I'm long gone, you'll be able to just probably dial up those films on your phone, on your telephone. That's great, but it's way, way too early to talk about how I'd like to be remembered.
You know, I've never been asked that question before. Face your mortality and answer. I want to be remembered for writing about people. And there was an ounce of humanity in the stories that I was able to tell. I'm the happiest guy in the world.
My fondest wish, I think I'd like to be remembered as a guy who really cared about the craft. I really cared about telling a good story and really cared about what he did. That's a good legacy, isn't it? That would be a worthy thing to leave behind.
I sort of like to see a working filmmaker who took assignments more often than not, who you know, was smart enough to gather together a gifted cast every time out and make movies that in some way or another addressed kind of the upside of human nature.
People who you know, enjoy movies will simply think that a film of mine is worth giving a chance to, stands an above average chance of being good, involving, worthy of their, you know, 90 to 120 minutes.
People are evaluated and put in context only having done one album, one novel, one movie, one play. And that's crazy. How are you going to really intelligently evaluate someone who's only done one thing? Smart people know you only do that when an artist develops a body of work. So that's always been the goal, to try to build a body of work.
The fact that I like to make films about stories that I'm fascinated by, and characters and behavior and personal kinds of moments and humor and humanity, that's what ultimately excites me. And if I can continue to do that and have a good time and have people be fascinated by it, that's all I can do.
I mean, I hope my work is going to be remembered in a better light than it is today. And I think in time, a lot of the contemporary feelings about the films will have drifted away, and people will be able to see the films in their true light. They're you know, very simple and very complex at the same time.
I hope that people will remember me and my films as a person who gave you a film that made you feel good. That's what I try to do. Now, feel-good movies are, as I said, out of style right now, but I don't care. I'll make feel-good movies and make you feel good, even if you don't want to feel good. I'll make you feel good.
And I remembered just as a girl who survived in a business of men, I guess, was set some groundwork, which I didn't mean to do. I wasn't knocking on people's door, it just happened. My life happened by accident.
I tried to depict people and places, certain types of places and certain types of people, as honestly as possible, as realistically, even if it was in a how should I say, not necessarily the physical aspect of it, but the nature of the people and the nature of the society they're in. In the case of Mean Streets or Alice or Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and Goodfellas and Age of Innocence. Try to be true to those human emotions that make up what we are as people.
Quality does start to kick in. So you do start to get aware of the fact that I've now done X number of films. So I start to think about them as a kind of, yeah, it's what you leave behind, really. You know, I think all you do is think, hope it was worth it.
It's very flattering and good for the ego to feel that other people enjoy what you bring to the screen as a piece of entertainment, you know. I can feel the applause inside me when I'm not hearing them.
I have absolutely no perspective on how anyone should interpret or think about my work after I'm gone. When I'm gone, I'm gone. The work will do what it does. I mean, I guess I would hope that people are entertained by it, that it entertains them.
One pleasure that I've had is that, you know, we get letters from families that say that, you know, they had a dying relative in a hospital or something, and they all sat in the hospital room and watched Police Squad, or, you know, watched one of the Naked Gun movies or Airplane, and they all laughed. I mean, some people think it actually does cure cancer, so that's kind of, that's a nice feeling to think that maybe we did something positive.
I don't have a plan for this, but I hope that I just hope that my body of work is always one of stretching and not ever becoming one that I don't ever want to go back over any familiar territory.
I think staying active in life is what keeps a person vital. Maybe it's time to hang it up, but maybe there's a couple more things to do out there.
The only parting words I have is that when I die, I want on my tombstone it should read, "Now I'm in this place."
I mean, it really is like going down to the beach and we say, "Hey, let's make a sandcastle." And we go down there and we all work, and I say, "You do the windows, and you do the moat," and we work and work, and then the tide starts coming in, and we finish this castle, and we go sit up and have a beer and watch the tide come in, and then in an hour, nothing's there. And everybody starts walking home, and we hear this, and they say, "Well, what about next Saturday? Should we build another one?" Somebody will say, "Well, okay, but I'm not doing windows this time. I want to do the towers. And that's really all what it is. But eventually it's all going to be, an even beach.
A script is not meant to be literature. It's not going to be published, probably. It's only read by the people who are involved with it. Once the script leaves the writer's typewriter, it becomes the province of the actor to make it live, to give it flesh and blood. If you take 50 directors and 50 actors and give them the same script, you will get that multiplicity of interpretations.
It's always good to write a script in 6 weeks or something that's the right amount of time for the first pass. You can work on it more later, but the whole has to come together quickly, otherwise it's going to be a problem.
I do write the scripts longhand. I started out that way, and it's just a habit. We'll all have different ways of being inspired and do our thinking best under certain conditions. I just like to do cursive, and it makes me feel better.
I wouldn't know a good script if it bit me in the face, I really don't think I would. I've often dealt with bad scripts or scripts that aren't even there, but you kind of get involved because you're something about the property or the energy of it that's like, yeah, this is cool, okay.
I think for me the real criterion is that a script is a page turner, is that you can't put the thing down, is that you read it in one go and you jump up and say, I've got to do this.
If you're on the screen, why do you want to be on the screen? And if you want to be a writer, it's not like I want to be, it's just that you have it's not like a choice. You just are. You just are because there's stories that you want to tell, the things you want to write about.
In my case, it's either something I develop from scratch and I fall in love with it and I have to make it, or it's something I read, somebody submits it to me, and I want to see that picture so badly, and since I've read it, I see it. I've seen it already, because I want to see that movie the way I saw it, not the way somebody else does.
I don't choose types of films. I just stumble across stories. I stumble across characters. And when I do, I just sort of accept or apply whatever genre or style or tone seems appropriate.
I've got to say, wow, what a good story. I want to share that. People should see this movie. But if it really pulls me, I know that difference. It's a bigger tickle that gets me to say, I'm not giving this away. I'm keeping this for myself. That's a much bigger tickle.
In between films, it's time to catch ideas for the next film, or ideas that you've had in the past that are fragments that you never knew what they were good for will marry to it suddenly. You're just getting it piecemeal. And so your job is to kind of pay attention and try to see how they marry and feel it. And one day, a script evolves.
I hate when they put in stage direction or crying or, stop it. Get that out of the way. You want someone to come in who's going to give you something different. So you want someone to be able to say it, but also add something from them.
It takes a long time till I feel like I've gotten into the character in a way that is not forced. And that's the point I look for. I look for a moment. I don't mean it's easy, but it feels natural or it feels right.
The subplots of a film, those are very important to me, particularly when you have material as rich as Steve King's. I want to speak in the tone of the author. I want to speak in his voice. Otherwise, why am I telling the story?
The books that struck me were sometimes a combination of very detailed character work and great adventure, and that would be like Joseph Conrad, who had enormous impact on me when I was studying English literature at the University of Michigan. But all the writers that I liked, Fitzgerald and Dostoevsky and Hemingway, were about character. And I found that the movies that I responded to were about character.
In looking back at the films I've made, the one thing I noticed that's consistent is that they seem to always focus around characters who are somehow multi-layered. Their actual identities or who they really are is sort of hidden behind a mask of some kind. And I think that subject matter for some reason interests me. Something realistic, but then yet larger than life. I think it's why I'm drawn to science fiction.
Both Say Anything and Jerry Maguire were the result of long periods of research and writing. They cooked a long time on the stove, those two scripts. I advise that for anybody, to research and really live with your script before you go out and make the movie.
I actually met with Nora Ephron about another project, which she wasn't so interested in, but in the lunch we were having, I said, I don't know what the plot is, I don't know, it's just men and women talking to each other about men and women. That's all it's going to be, that's all we started with. And I would sit with Nora, and I'd tell her my experiences. I'd tell her, this happened, and we used them, put them in the film. It was really a collaboration, a big collaboration, and just a big soup.
The sketches were written just as funny sketches. Now, they could have been done in a very obvious, cheap, comic way. But I think it was because Terry and I were so determined to try to make serious, epic films.
We're knights of the round table, we dance where we're able.
So everything is done very, very realistically. And then we have this very silly scene where a man is claiming not to be dead. I think I've always felt about comedy, if you could place it in as believable a situation, it's going to be funnier than putting it in an obviously artificial and obviously phony situation. So it's that tension between the two things that makes it more interesting.
The real approach to the picture was almost like oral history, where before there was writing, a man would tell a story, a village storyteller. Well, Henry Hill, in his dialogue that's quoted throughout the book, is literally telling you a story on a street corner.
There was Jimmy and Tommy and me, and there was Anthony Stabile.
How you doing? And I would listen to a lot of street corner stories when I was growing up. Some wonderful actors who were really just kids in the street. So this is how I heard it, just the way I heard people telling stories in the street, and that's what you have from the book. And we let that guide us. We let that voice guide us. In fact, that's why we use so much voiceover.
The first Naked Gun, we all sat down and everybody wrote 30 pages.
Cowards, no longer willing to fight.
We all wrote the first draft separately. I mean, not even in the same room together. And I think I wrote one more draft with Jerry, and then the next 6 drafts I wrote myself, probably in pre-production.
Blade Runner, they'd sent me, but Hampton and Michael Dede sent me what essentially was an internal play taking place in an apartment. That's how it started. So what followed was an 8.5-month process with Hampton every day, where we just expanded the whole story into this large science fiction.
I did learn from Exit to Eden that people like to see certain kinds of sexuality. The biggest thing in the country now is phone sex. So they like to imagine it. Maybe they don't like to see it, imagine it. Second biggest thing is porno movies. So I discovered, I was the one, that people do not like group voyeurism. They just like voyeurism, not groups, because they got too uncomfortable in the theater.
You know, it'd be great if there's this one book. You know, what do you do to talk to actors to get them to do what you want to do? Book.
I heard Colin Hanks on some of his father's advice, Tom's advice to him was, be on time, know your lines, and be nice to the crew. Yes, yes, yes.
I can't imagine making a film and throwing the visual side out the window. That'd be a disaster, it'd be awful. But what's important is the actors. You can have an awful looking movie that's well acted that will go through the roof, and you can have a beautifully lit nothing that will go down the toilet, always.
They're your whole movie, their faces, how they just, you know, literally ignite the frame with emotion. You can't buy that. You can't create it. You can't paint it on the screen. You have to deal with the humanity of it and the humanity of the actor.
Actors are people whose gift is saying goodbye to themselves and taking on a new persona. And the more they feel at ease and free to let their talent go, the better it is for them and the film.
It's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. You're trying to catch something that is effervescent, that is unknown. And it's only the director's feeling about the actor and knowledge of the actor that allows the director to push the actor further and further.
If a scene is played by 5 people, and it's exactly the way I envisioned it, and it's exactly the way it was written, and it's exactly the way everything is supposed to be, I say, okay, that's all right, but I'm not very excited about it. Because if I say, play it this way, I've narrowed it in to where they're going to stay within that boundary, and they're not going to have all this room to work. I want them to have all the room there is.
I really believe The best way to direct is to really get the best cast you can and to make a world in which they're safe to try whatever they want to try and then get out of their way. Because they're going to do something that I could never have dreamed of doing.
You have to be in an eye-level partnership with your actors. And that's with every actor. That's not just with the stars. That's with every actor. I mean, anybody that's got a moment in your film, no matter how fleeting, is just as important as anybody else in the film.
The supporting casts really are the unsung heroes of many films, and certainly I think of mine. Not just the obvious big names like Tom Hanks or Jim Carrey, but everybody. They're as vital to the process of telling the story as the story itself. They are the conduit through which the story flows.
I've always loved the commitment that actors have to the material, and I always appreciated seeing them with their scripts where they've got all these notes in the margins, and they've got all these kind of impressions and things that came to mind and beats they want to hit. It's just like, that's great.
I do believe in showing actors what the scene's going to appear like. Again, if I have something, I don't try to keep it hidden from them, because then you can get even more elaboration out of their suggestion. Good performers have ideas and visualizations that will enhance the project.
Once you've worked with an actor, things get much simpler. There's a kind of shorthand to it, so you don't really have to say very much to them, and they sort of trust you. And you know what they really, in a serious way, how much they can bring to it if you let them do it.
I don't really direct actors. I cast well and get the right people for the part, and then I hopefully provide a good audience for them. I listen to them. When they're funny, I laugh. When they're sad, I cry. I remember growing up thinking, oh, the way you direct actors must be, John Ford would say, they're like cattle. You wheel them in, you wheel them out. And then Bergman would be very sensitive. I couldn't work out how you were supposed to work with actors. And then I realized it was incredibly easy. You get the right actor and you talk intelligently to them and you're sensitive to their needs, and it kind of happens.
And I always try to create an environment, not unlike the one that we had on the Andy Griffith Show when I was 8 years old that I observed. It was an environment where actors were encouraged to participate.
I'm never asking an actor to do something that I can't do. I'm never asking them to make a transition that I can't make in a scene. But if they're struggling with the transition or with a moment, I can act it out for them. I can show them what needs to happen there, because I have a pretty good ear and I have a certain feeling about how I want a scene to sound musically. There's a music to every scene and the notes that you hit in a scene. Especially with comedy, which is all very rhythmic, and you have to have the right emphasis and you have to have the right rhythms in order to make the jokes work. I have a sense of that, so I can give them that. I can show them that.
Well, I don't know if I have any kind of a secret working with kids. I feel like I am a kid, so I think I relate to kids really well. And also allowing them to have a say in the characters they're playing, allowing them to mix their own language in with the language of the writer. So many of the wonderful lines from E.T., albeit written by Melissa Matheson and wonderfully written by her. Other lines came from Drew Barrymore and Henry Thomas and Robert McNaughton, just from that zeitgeist the kids bring to a film.
I think in my earlier films, I felt compelled to tell the actors more than they needed to know. I would do things that were could have been very nerve-wracking. Just before I would roll the camera, I'd say, now remember to hit that mark and lean into the light, and I'd drive them crazy because I didn't want the take messed up because of some mechanical thing that I wanted them to remember to do, and I think that was so I stopped doing that.
I remember one scene that Robert Stack was in an airplane. We were more or less asking him to play Elliot Ness. We had written this one line where he had to kind of repeat some things over and over again, and he was saying it's his ship now, his command, he's the top dog, the big cheese. Which we actually had gotten out of an old John Biner routine, who was imitating Robert Stack. In the rehearsal, he said, he's the top dog, he's the head man, he's the chief. And we had to explain, no, we want you to do it more like John Biner. And so I remember Jerry kind of following him around on the set, trying to do Jerry's impersonation of John Biner, doing an impersonation of Robert Stack. And he did get it. He finally, I think he got the picture. I don't know if Bob Stack had ever seen John Byner's impersonation, but he actually did a pretty good impersonation of himself at the end.
Besides being known as kind of a filmmaker that did a good job and was amusing and could do a film, I was also known as a handler, where I could handle anybody, which I do handle any kind of star. I have no fear of anybody. I think one of the biggest things in handling big stars is you can't be frightened. Bette Midler told me after the movie Beaches, she says, you know, you were the first director who really wasn't afraid of me. And I come from the streets of the Bronx, I'm afraid of nobody. What are they going to do, yell? I've heard yelling you wouldn't believe. You should meet my father. I once said that I like to get people either just as they're beginning and before rehab. That's when you get the stars. And I've gotten a lot of them in that slot.
A cinematographer doesn't just light. You know, he is involved with the emotions, with movement, with an overall look, a sense of visual, and they can make or break you. It's just another faction that you add together, and your thought process is an amalgamation of lots, and one of them is your cinematographer.
I worked with James Wong Howe, who was a great cameraman, to try to take the color out of the color, if you will. They sprayed the trees, semi-transparent, brownish liquid to take some of the color out. We burnt tires. The black smoke kind of drifted in and out of the scenes and filtered everything down. These are not necessary today. You can do it technically, digitally, computer-wise, whatever. But in 1965, this was a kind of a bold technique.
I was very interested, for example, in Francis Bacon's pictures, which are horrifying when you look at them. They're smeared and blurred, and you think, my God, what's happening underneath that? So I tried to do the visual equivalent of that, and we did a lot of shaking images. We rolled at 4 frames rather than 24 frames, and I would have the actors like moving around like this to create a kind of frenetic sort of blur. If you looked at it for a second, it was silly. But if you looked at it for a quarter of a second or even less, it was frightening when you put the right noise with it, when you put the right sound effect with it. So it was a question of the amount you got to see these things. It's fascinating, really.
In Buffalo Bill, I would go back a quarter of a mile and shoot the 2-shot through a long lens, which gave it it flattened it out and gave it just a kind of a bizarre look. And we shot the whole film that way. I remember we had so many times the camera was so far away, we had to communicate over a telephone line.
My cinematographer, David Tattersall, and I really had a lot of discussions about how to keep that set interesting in the Green Mile, because you really are on a cell block for this small cell block set for really the lion's share of the movie. We wanted very much to approach every scene on that cell block in some kind of visually different manner, so that we wouldn't get the audience wouldn't get visually oppressed by it.
I think a lot of people aren't trained to watch dense visual films, because most films put the object, the key thing right there in front of you, and it lingers on it, so that's what we're supposed to be looking at any moment. We were using wide-angle lenses in ways that people hadn't used them, and a wide-angle lens can become both a strange thing. You seem to be into the film, and the film is surrounding you. I think it's, on one hand, you're feeling claustrophobic, on the other hand, you're feeling agoraphobic, because there's so much of it. And there's so many things to occupy your eyes.
Well, it was very challenging as a director to try to come up with something, photograph this bus, this confined space, so it would not be monotonous and not lull the audience to sleep. Because of the small space, I really decided that we shoot it on Super 16. I like to shoot with 2 cameras, and 2 35 cameras would not been able to fit in that bus.
The final battle and the opening battle were the 2 hardest parts of that picture, obviously, to put on film honestly. And I think if it weren't for Schindler's List, I would not had a way into the telling of that story, because Schindler's List gave me courage about the documentary approach to filmmaking. I said, I'm going to take a lesson from Schindler's List. I'm going to shoot Private Ryan the same way a combat cameraman shot World War II, as low to the ground and as safely out of harm's way as possible, getting shots when he could, and with a very shaky camera. It's never slick and CB DeMille. It's extremely, rough and almost dirty.
There are two reasons black and white. Number one, the color fading problem. I said, why design the picture in color when it's going to fade? And we have no guarantee of the color remaining more than 10 years, maybe less, at this rate. And I think a lot of it had to do with the aspect of how I grew up looking at television, black and white movies, and how that set you in a certain time frame, a period piece in a way, and also made it more expressive, so that you don't know that the fluids that are coming off the fighters, or the blood or sweat or water, you don't know what it is. It's part of the whole experience of being inside the ring. And so between the idea of something looking period, linking us to the daily news, for example, the photography of the daily news, photography of Ouija, linking us there, and also with the idea of not fading color. There is some color in the film, but I've already faded it because it was faded home movies.
The first day I was ever on a sound stage was on this at Universal with the Hitchcock Hour, and I was working with a great cinematographer named Jack Warren, John L. Warren, who had won an Academy Award for The Country Girl that he lit with Grace Kelly. And so I set up a shot that was like a 4 or 5 page master that involved people walking all over one set and going into another set and the camera following them. And it took me about 4 or 5 hours to get it. Norman Lloyd came up behind me and Jack Warren was standing behind me, and I heard Norman whisper to Jack Warren. He said, "Jack," he said, "that shot was incredible." He said that, it took forever. He said, but it was really wonderful. I heard Jack whisper to him, he said, "That was my idea." He said, "That shot was my idea," meaning his. And I learned my first lesson in Hollywood, which is that success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan.
Whenever we're startled or delighted at the movies, it's always about something touching our hearts and our minds in a new way, or in a very familiar way that seems fresh. It has nothing to do with budget or stardom or commercial success or critical success. It has to do with the startling insight. It has to do with the moment of blinding truth, when you're sitting in a movie theater and you expect nothing and suddenly you're giving it everything. It's what we hope for most from art, whether it's a painting or a poem or a song. But it just stirs us up in some new way. And we say, yes, that makes my life more vivid and real and rich.
As a director, you are constantly challenged by how long are you willing to stay there to try and get something a little bit better? How much are you willing to gamble of a studio's time and money, of the actor's emotional output, of your own sense of what is the right way to approach this project? To either settle for something that you don't think is quite right, or to try and go one step beyond to try and achieve something a little better.
It's about satisfaction. It's about maybe learning a little something, enjoying yourself, having a terrific time, and maybe feeling a little something. If you can get that, and you can get an audience excited about something, that's important. That's more important to me than what the head of some studio thinks about me.
I grew up watching John Ford movies and David Lean movies and Frank Capra movies and Billy Wilder movies, and this, to me, these always focused so much on the story and on the characters. You never really saw the director's hand in it necessarily. You never saw the director doing what a lot of directors seem to do nowadays, which is jump in front of the lens and say, "Hey, I'm the star here, not the story, not the actors." It seems like a lot of people want to prove something about their directorial style. My directorial style is I want to have as invisible a style as possible. I want to be the man behind the curtain and let the story lead the way.
I subscribe to the theory of Bill Goldman, well-known screenwriter, who says nobody knows nothing. And he's kind of right when it comes to movies in Hollywood and making movies, or whether they're made in Hollywood, New York, or Europe, or wherever, is nobody really knows anything about whether a film's going to make money or not. And all you can do is just think in terms of making the film the very best you can, and don't think about all that other stuff. In fact, it isn't your job to think about all that. Your job is to present the story as the best you can.
I always regarded it as far more than a movie. It's got to be entertaining, but I want it to be more. I want it to be raising consciousness. I want people to be feeling exhilarated, to be as if they experienced another world they maybe never thought of, or partly, or just something has changed for them, maybe forever.
Whenever people would meet me, even as I went on to films that were a bit more socially acceptable, or when people became more used to the idea of a horror film as part of a social commentary or whatever, people would always say, "I can't believe you make those. I can't believe you have those thoughts in your head." And where do you get those thoughts? I've always been struck by that disconnect between people and the world they live in. They almost always, when they see a piece of art that depicts violence, will look at the filmmaker as the source. And it still strikes me to this day, that art becomes kind of the target for what people are upset about in real life.
I'm trying to, as a storyteller, broaden my own understanding of what is entertaining and what kinds of stories can be entertaining that aren't necessarily genre films that you immediately associate with high entertainment. And so I'm interested in pushing myself to find that which is entertaining, compelling, involving in stories, presenting it to an audience, and having them feel that, yes, they've been transported.
As Billy Wilder says, you must sugarcoat that pill. They swallow it before they even know what they have swallowed. And I don't really think of it in that kind of mechanical way, but what I do know is that when the lights come up after you've seen a movie, you sometimes go out into the world and look at the world differently. And that's a lot of lofty talk that I never really say out loud, but I don't want to squander the opportunity of taking a couple hours of people's time. I want them to feel enhanced from the experience, same way I would as a fan.
I love doing this job. It's a great job to have, when I can be a part of somebody else's dream and putting that dream on the screen, or if I can get an idea from my, naked brain in the middle of the night and write it down on the back of a, piece of paper, and 18 months later, whatever's on the back of that piece of paper is a big movie or a small movie. I mean, that is the stuff that makes all of us want to, work in this business and create and have fun.
The whole thing is translating that idea to a medium. And in the case of film, it takes a long time, and you always need to go back and stay true to that idea. Keep checking that idea. So they're very special, and it's very special that you be true to the ideas.
Just when you think you have it, you don't. You never do. You never have it. You've always got to keep adjusting it. If you're not your own biggest critic, you're in trouble, basically.
I think the media has really done something to our culture to where people are thinking about that more than they are the root of what it is they're doing. As things get more at our disposal, technology, and we get more information rapidly, it's always important to go back into yourself and remember that it's all based on an idea, a project, and a passion that you have to do something. It's very hard to ward off those influences and those things out there and to just keep that focus. And again, that's the seed where everything else comes from. And if you don't have that, you just don't have that foundation. And I think even for myself, I find it's hard to kind of keep that and remember that with all this abstraction going on.
When you're doing a movie, you take it seriously because I'm compulsive obsessive, but it is just a movie. There are more important things in life. Life is more important than show business.
Every single studio is now owned by a large conglomerate, and that in all of their other product lines manufacture a disposable, repeatable product, whether it's a car or a soft drink or an electronic device. And everybody knows that what it's designed for is 2 hours of entertainment, and then it can be disposed of, never thought of again. It doesn't feel as good as it used to feel, where you felt that everybody had a shot at each film finding its own audience in a certain way.
It's become, in a sense, too paid attention to, too precious, too talked about. It's become too discovered a thing, and everybody talks about grosses, and it lost its magic, There is no such thing as the star anymore, or the mystique. That's gone. There's no mystique. it's a business.
There's a new generation of people making decisions in Hollywood who are the worst kind of progeny of television. They don't even remember Midnight Cowboy and MASH and Shampoo and Last Detail and Last Tango and Chinatown and Godfather and American Graffiti. Their references are to hits of the last 5 years, and they're trying to duplicate those hits.
The industry changed in the early 80s. The 70s were over. The personal film, in a sense, to a certain extent, because there are still personal films being made in Hollywood, but this is something else. Something else happened there. You had Star Wars, you had E.T. even, which was made for, it was a personal film by Spielberg, but it was made for very little money, 10 million. It made billions. So, you know, everything changed. And the darker pictures had a harder time getting financed.
The films that are more complex or more personal at times are harder to sell. The upside is much less, and ultimately they're open for more criticism because they ultimately present a bunch of ideas. Whereas if you make something that is much more mechanical, in a sense it's more protected at the same time, because what can you say? You can say, well, I didn't believe the thing. Well, you're not supposed to. What's the difference? It's not important. You know, and it isn't in a way. It's not. It's just the energy and the noise and the confusion and whatever, and it kind of like pumps you up, and you kind of watch and you leave and you go home, and that's the end of that. So there's a very little upside to any kind of, you know, personal film that in a sense sometimes may even get under your skin in a way.
People are scared to make interesting films. So everybody's looking for this big blockbuster, and a lot of these movies suck. They're terrible.
You're finding that the middle films are the ones that are being cut out now, because you concentrate everything on the big blockbusters, and you make films for $5 or $7 or $8 million. Those are safe, and some of them might work. What's interesting is the films in the middle, the ones 25, 30, $35 billion, which could be intelligent films with decent enough stars that would attract a decent audience, aren't getting made at the moment. They're the ones that are being squeezed out.
Stand By Me, which was released in 1986, never did more than $3.5 million on any given weekend, and wound up doing $55 million in America for a picture that cost $7.5 million to make. That was an enormous success. And yet, if that picture were released today, if it only did $3.5 million the first weekend, after 2-3 weekends, it's thrown out of the theater. Because there's so many more pictures that are coming that are going to gross more than $3.5 million in the first weekend, and the theater owners don't care that they've kicked you out, because even if the picture that they just put in to replace you doesn't do well, they got another one to replace that.
They don't have that passion that you hear about in certain people these people that sort of founded the industry. And even a few years ago, you could find pockets of people that were in charge and that you could talk to. And so I do think it's basically harder, although at the same time, technology and people being able to do their own films and it has opened it up more. So I think that interesting time, and I do think there's more interesting things maybe going on now than there has in the past. So it just, you know, like anything, it goes through its phases.
Still in our lifetime, and maybe even sooner, you won't need anything except a computer keyboard to create any type of spectacle. And then it's going to ultimately come down to the vision of the filmmaker, because he'll be able to do anything.
I think that it's the texture and the experience of working with film that will create a breed of digital filmmakers that will have some kind of reverence towards the more traditional modes of storytelling that really do work. It's just a matter of the art moving as it will gracefully with the technology. It will.
The independent film scene has taken on the burden of doing decent movies. And there are great films coming out of the independent world.
There's a lot of darkness and a lot of chicanery and finality in the film business. There just is. A lot of things that you just assume not know about human people. But there's also a lot of wonderful, wonderful care and love, especially among, I think, cast and crew, that is there and that will sustain you through a lot of very, very dark moments.
There were two Siamese twins, two fellas, and they wanted to be race car drivers, and they lived in Indiana. And the dream of these Siamese twins race car drivers from Indiana is that they someday would drive in London so the other brother could drive the car. I think dreams are very important, even if people don't understand them. And somebody asked me, what is the power in Hollywood? Is it being on the list of most powerful people, many who are in rehab, or is it something that you have the most money and you're paying a lot of alimony? What is the power in Hollywood? Or you have this wonderful family. I think the power in Hollywood is to have the passion that you believe in the project you're doing so much that you can convince everybody around to do it your way. After you listen to them a minute, then say, here's what I see. And the power in Hollywood is to get what you see up there on the screen the way you see it. That's the real power of Hollywood. Whether it's a hit or a miss is irrelevant. But to get it up on the screen, that's the power of a filmmaker, to get it up on the screen the way he wants it.